In this video, we'll be talking about the racial abilities of the Dwarf race, and not to be confused with the Dark Iron Dwarf. Starting out nice and simple, we have Frost Resistance. Back in vanilla, each school of magic had a resistance stat for it, and what this racial did was give you a plus 10 to your Frost Resistance stat. This increased your chance to resist damage from that school for various different Frost-related things. In PvE, Frost Resistance was not very useful, except on Sapphirion and Axaramis. In PvP, however, it was much more useful at resisting the Frostbolt of a mage, which could be a lifesaver. Next up, we have Find Treasure. This was an ability you can activate that lets you track treasures on your minimap, like the Find Herbs and Find Minerals abilities you got when you learned Herbalism or Mining, respectively. It would add a little yellow dot to your minimap, just tracking treasure chests and lockboxes, as well as certain quest items instead of resource nodes. Most of the time it was kind of useless because of the low respawn rate of chests, but it was a perfectly flavorful ability to have. Thirdly, Dwarves got Gun Specialization, which, like all the other weapon racial specializations, added a plus 5 to the Dwarves' weapon skill with guns. In vanilla, this was okay while leveling, but unfortunately all the best endgame weapons were either bows or crossbows, so it wasn't competitive as other weapon skill racials. Lastly, the most interesting of the racials, we have Stoneform. When activated, this granted immunity to bleed, poison, and disease effects, in addition to increasing the dwarf's armor by 10% for 8 seconds, all on a 3-minute cooldown. This was really good, especially in PvP, as it would remove a rogue's poisons or warrior's bleeds, or both. It could even remove a rogue's blind, as during vanilla it was considered a poison rather than a physical attack. This racial made dwarves a good pick for PvP early on, and while not as impactful now, it still remains a decent enough choice for PvP. Later on in patch 1.6 in vanilla, it enabled you to also remove self-inflicted poisons for instances when your poisons got reflected back onto you, since for some reason the racial made a distinction about that early on. During the Burning Crusade, nothing changed for the racials at launch, but later on in patch 2.2, the rogue's blind was changed to be a physical attack school, so Stoneform could no longer be used to make yourself immune to it. Then in the next patch of 2.3, when weapon skills were all changed from plus 5 skills to plus 5 expertise, range skills were also rebalanced. But since range weapons didn't use expertise, they instead were given a 1% crit buff with their given weapon. So dwarves got a 1% crit boost when using guns. And in BC, this was actually useful, as there were high level guns that were considered best in slot. Though later on, bows did again take the top spot for ranged weapons. The last change was in 2.4, where Find Treasure no longer deactivated upon death, which was quite a nice small quality of life change. In Wrath of the Lich King, there were 2 changes to Dwarfs racials. First was a complete revamp of Stoneform, where in patch 3.1, it no longer made you immune to poisons, disease, and bleed effects, and instead just cleared any of these effects that you had on you when you cast it. And its cooldown was reduced from 3 minutes down to 2 minutes. This was quite a big change, as now instead of being immune to the effects, you simply cleared them, and they could be reapplied even while you had the Stoneform's 10% armor boost active. But while the effect is weaker, you could now use it more often. So there were trade-offs. And the other change was that the resistance racials were changed to, instead of giving 10 resistance, it now just reduced your chance to be hit by frost spells by 2%. Unlike Wrath, Cataclysm brought a whole bunch of changes to Dwarfs racials. Starting off, Dwarves gained Mace Specialization. This had been in the game since launch, but it had been a human racial until now. At the time it was given to dwarves, it was a plus 3 to expertise with maces and 2-handed maces. This was not the high point of the weapon skill racial, as earlier they gave a plus 5 expertise. But who would complain about a new racial? Take what you can get. And that wasn't the only new racial dwarves got. Find Treasure was removed. But with the new archaeology profession added to the game, Find Treasures was replaced with Explorer, which increased your archaeology skill by 15 and let dwarves use archaeology survey skill faster, much in the same way that a Tauren could herb faster, and at the time, the newly added Worgen could skin faster. At some point this was changed, however. It still gave the boost to survey speed, but instead of giving the plus 15 bonus to the profession, it increased the number of archaeology fragments you gained from each pickup, which was probably for the best, as due to travel times between dig sites, some people have said it takes as long to max out archaeology as it did to max out fishing, and gaining extra fragments would speed up that process. Resistance racials were also reworked again, reverting a little bit so that Frost Resistance gave Frost Resistance again, but instead of being a flat plus 10 like it was in vanilla and TBC, it now scaled based on your level, starting off with 1 and going up to 85 at max level. In addition to all this, Stoneform got another change. In patch 4.06, It now, instead of increasing your armor by 10%, it reduced all damage taken by 10%, a rather significant buff. And with this part of Stoneform changed, it was now a completely different ability than the one Dwarves originally had back in vanilla, where it used to grant you immunity to a couple of schools of magics and bleeds and a armor increase, and now just a flat damage reduction. Mista Pandaria had less changes than Cataclysm, but there were also a couple nonetheless. To start off, Frost Resistance was again changed to reduce the damage taken by 1%. Resistances were slowly being phased out of the game, so a 1% damage reduction is better than having a racial completely removed. At the same time, Gun Specialization was removed and replaced with Crackshot. They gave you a 1% expertise bonus with all ranged weapons, as during the expansion they thought it was unfair hunters didn't have to use the expertise stat, but all melee physical classes did. So they applied it to them for this one expansion before removing it completely from the game in WoD. Because it turned out, people didn't like the stat at all, as all it did was reduce the chance a target could dodge or parry your attacks. So it was basically a second hit chance stat. And with hunters having to worry about a new stat, this was actually a decent change for dwarf hunters. And now dwarves weren't stuck playing second fiddle to night elves at Alliance, whenever bows were the best in slot weapons. Truly a welcome change, if a short-lived one. Moving on to Warlords of Draenor, all the weapon skill racials were removed, and Crackshot along with them. Mace Specialization was also removed, and at least the dwarves got something to replace their new racial, Might of the Mountain. Might of the Mountain gave dwarves a 2% increase to critical damage and healing, and while it's nothing to write home about, it's still better than nothing. Especially when most classes with weapon skill racials got nothing to compensate for losing those racials. The other big change for dwarves was with Stoneform again. It now removes magic and curse effects in addition to the poisons, disease, bleeds that it always did. The other half of it also changed, so instead of reducing all damage taken by 10% for 8 seconds, it now only reduced physical damage taken. Also, it cannot be used during crowd control effects now. In the first patch of WoD in 6.1, they added on a 30-second shared cooldown with this ability and other PvP trinkets that do break CC effects, despite the fact that the ability could no longer be used to break them. So they kind of buffed and nerfed the ability a little bit, as being able to purge magical effects is really good, but now you can't use it to break CC effects. The final and most recent change to the Dwarves racials came in Legion, as a hotfix early on which made Might of the Mountain appear in the spellbook properly, which was basically just fixing an oversight or a bug. And that's it. Since that small hotfix in Legion, nothing has changed for dwarves and their racials. It ends not with a bang, but with a whimper, but hey, maybe that means the dwarves' racials were actually pretty balanced, and if your racials are balanced, at least it decreases the chance you'll get nerfed. And in the most recent raid, Castle Nathria, the dwarves' stone racial ability was objectively the best racial, but the reason you didn't see top guilds clearing out an alliance is a topic for another video. If you have ideas for future videos, be sure to leave them down in the comments below.